standing up there with this, so.
You want us to let go? You want us to move down there? I don't.
There's only one of you, and
Yeah, nice microphone.
excellent point.
Chair.
And you all can clearly see the presentation, so I think we're good. Okay, so welcome. It's been a while since we had one of these meetings. I know we had a virtual meeting a while ago for the uses, but this is specific to parking. And we've got a presentation for you that Jonathan's going to go through. How many of you, I think we've had a study session, so I think Jonathan Small have some awareness of what's going on here, deep awareness, I should say. And Dan, were you able to attend that one, the study session? Does that ring a bell for the park?
Quite some time ago?
Yeah, it's about 6 months ago, I want to say.
Yeah, I think I was at the one. Been to
6 months, okay. So we want to present that to you, and just feel free to ask questions. This is just kind of us discussing it with you all, getting your thoughts. We'll talk about the timing of both the parking code and everything else related to the zoning code. I think towards the end, we'll give you an update.
I'm sorry. Marilyn, can they hear if Jeff doesn't use the microphone?
Oh, is some of our people?
Sure. The Nary's on, and some other people were going to join.
Okay, so
But I don't.
I will use it. I feel better knowing that
Mike's picking up.
it helps people who are joining us virtually, so this is for them.
Not for us.
Okay, so Lisa, is there anything else that I needed to cover by way of introduction, or Marilyn or Jonathan before we get in here? Okay.
Welcome Kamal to the.
Yes, welcome them all to the SAT. Thank you. You haven't been here before, so. And recently, I get word that the mayor is going to add a person for kind of representing homelessness, affordable housing type issues. So that hasn't happened quite yet. So without further ado, I will hand over the microphone. And Jonathan, are you going to start us off?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, actually, I was going to.
Okay, Marilyn's going to start us off.
Okay. All right. We're small but mighty, so thank you for coming. We thought that this was a good one to have in person, just because there might be a lot of questions. We'll probably jump back to some virtual in September, but we're hoping to meet a little more often and get this going. So today I wanted to sort of let you know what's happening with the code update in case you weren't aware of all the pieces. You remember back in 2023, we talked about the UM zones and all the patterns for the UM zones, and those are substantially complete. We sort of put those on the back burner while we worked on the uses and the use regulations. And y'all were helpful in your comments with that. We presented to the Planning Commission on August 14th a presentation about the uses, and we put them up for public comment on our code update, our in-code tool. So if y'all want to go back to that tool and see kind of how things turned out, that's kind of the version that's going to be working its way now through public comment. And now the next piece, which is really important and exciting piece, is what we call the development standards. Well, what we're going to start calling them the development standards. Right now, I think it's called like site standards, and we've got parking and landscaping, but all those things will be a section in the development standards. So that's what we're going to bring to you today. First we're going to start with the parking. And really, besides the zones, you were somewhat complexity, but hopefully we got a lot of the details worked out, and it's going to be easy to read now. The parking is kind of the biggest change to the code besides the new zones. And so we're starting here. Today we're going to show you what the what the concept is, that's a big change, and then preview some of the landscape, parking lot landscaping requirements that go with that. If you know anything about the code right now, the parking lot landscaping is in the landscaping chapter. So we're pulling all that out. It's gonna be in the parking chapter now. And then we'll still have landscaping. And there's a bit of coordination that we're still trying to do between those two chapters. But as we wanted to kind of introduce this first and get y'all thinking about this, and then the landscaping chapter. So we're gonna have to review kind of everything together. Because the uses, parking, and landscaping really kind of can go as a package. And they, we need them to make the zones work, but they actually will apply to the whole city, most of the requirements. And so it could be that if we could get them to where you like them and Planning Commission likes them and the City Council likes them, we could replace those sections in the existing code and get some immediate results right now. So that's what we're thinking. We'll let you tell us if that's a good idea or not. And we're going to show you the parking concept. We have our senior planners, Jonathan Land and Joe Hudson, but the whole planning department has been working on this, our consultants. So this is a big group effort. So we're excited to show you the concept. So Jonathan's going to take over now.
Thank you, Marilyn. Everybody hear me okay? I know I have a very loud voice, so if my mouth gets too close to the microphone, somebody just say something. I don't want to be yelling at you. So excited today to talk about what we're proposing for parking in our code update. For myself, personally, parking is a very, very important piece of our cities and how we design our built environment. There's a lot of opportunity that we lose when we overbuild parking. When we put parking in, there's things like houses, there's things like commercial areas. There's a lot of space that we can use for parking when it's not being utilized. So very excited to talk about this. We presented in last January to our planning commission in a study session on the overall concepts we're going with parking. This will be more of an introduction and getting maybe slightly bit more technical before we're planning to release the draft very soon for comment. But first off, I want to talk about, reviews. If you were at the planning commission in January, some of this might look very familiar. And I'm going to see if there's a clicker over here. Is this working? So I can change the slides. So let's talk about why we need to modernize our current parking standards. And the first thing I want to talk about is parking minimums. You may have seen some national articles on this. You may have seen even some YouTube videos on this if you're in YouTube. We have a lot of parking. We have done an excellent job, not only as a city, but as a nation on providing adequate parking for people that drive around in motors. This is a little excerpt here on number of parking spaces. So the US has approximately 2 billion parking spaces, but only 250 million cars. That means at any one point, there are 7 empty parking spaces in the United States for the 1 parking space you parked our car. This was a little study that was done by an intern for our planning department, I believe it was last year, Maryland, and he went to Walgreens and CVS and looked at what the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which a lot of our modern parking standards are based on. How does that compare to what he was actually seeing and how people were parking? Was it being fully utilized? What he saw with peak times was there were some peak times, but it never resulted in getting anywhere close to the parking minimums we currently have in place. There's probably a lot of reasons for that. I think our recent pandemic kind of has changed some of our behaviors and made some things more convenient. So you can order food online. I think you could do that before the pandemic, but it got more popular to your door. You can online shop. You can, Well, you can do a lot online now, and going in person and parking is great. We want to encourage more of that, but there's a lot of ways in which we don't have to utilize all that parking that we built, that we've assumed over the years. This is a little excerpt here. This is from Charles Marone, if you're familiar with the Strong Towns movement. They have a hashtag Black Friday parking thing they do every Black Friday on Twitter. So the idea behind that is a lot of engineers will say, well, yes, there's a lot of parking. Yes, it's very overbuilt and underutilized, but really it's there for Black Friday. It's when it's that peak time, everybody's trying to come in. That's what we need it for that convenience. And so he started a movement. I recommend you go out on Twitter and look at it if you want to see more, but you know, what is actually happening on Black Friday? Still seeing very similar things. A lot of that parking still is remaining unchanged. So the thesis that we're building for peak parking doesn't quite hold as well when we look at a lot of the evidence going out. And then I just wanted to plug here, this is Donald Shoup. He passed away, I believe, last year, but he was a public policy professor at UCLA, and he spent most of his career studying parking. The cost of parking, you know, the economic cost, the environmental cost, the opportunity cost. And if you're interested in anything else about, you know, additional about parking, these two books that I have them, I'd be happy to lend them. I talk a lot about how we overbuild and just create a lot of free parking that kind of subsidizes that market. So on top of that, I want to get into, so what are some of the human environmental costs of our parking? For a long time, we've built parking because it's convenient. It's nice to have a lot of that. I mean, who wouldn't want to have that, right? You know, sometimes I go in a parking lot and I start, you know, getting kind of upset when I can't find a space. But there's real cost to overbuilding that parking. So in 2023, we released our sustainability office, T.O. Bowman, our urban heat island effect. For the first time ever, we were able to start looking at our city in terms of the urban heat that it was emitting during the summertime, during those warm months. Very hot temperatures. One of the findings out of this urban heat island study was that the land use that contributed the most to an urban heat island, and it was also the hottest, was our parking lots. Our parking contributes a lot of this urban heat island. And of course, jumping to this next slide, you know, there are negative effects on human health. If you work outside, if, you know, I do lawn work you know, in the summers, it gets really hot. So there are negative effects coming from that urban heat that comes off of parking. Large parking lots are very significant contributors to that. And not only is it just the heat, but we also wanted to mention, you know, having all that impervious surface, there's a lot of chemical pollutant runoff coming from the cars that gets into our streams and our water supply. But there's also a lot of urban flooding. We've seen some flooding events on the news. We see a lot of record rainfall we're seeing year after year. Flooding is becoming, not only did it used to be, but it's becoming a very pertinent issue. And having these, you know, very impervious lots lined out across the city, that is contributing to that. So let's talk about what our comprehensive plan, Plan OKC, envisions for parking in our code. And there's a number of policies, but I really want to give focus right here to these first two. And this is, these first two policies right here were a big strategy and a focus when we were writing this parking piece of our code. So conduct parking studies to develop standards based on land use, location, and demand, and then increase trees and landscape islands in parking lots. And I'll talk a little about this here in a second, but this is a big piece too that we've put a lot of effort in. And so why are trees important? Why is landscaping and parking important? Surely you're just storing your car there, right? Well, number one, we talked about the urban heat island effect. And so we've recognized a lot of ways to combat that urban heat island is to have more landscaping, have more trees. This is taken in Oklahoma City. This is south of the Meridian Gardens. I think this was in summer. This is from our urban heat island study. So right here in the shade, you see with this tree, and I believe this is midday, 122 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade of that tree. without any shade, and this is part of the street, but it's also that pavement for the parking, a 20-degree difference. So by just having trees within our parking areas, we are helping to cool that pavement there by, I would say personally, a very drastic amount of 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Additionally, and you'll hear a little bit more about this when Joe presents on the landscaping, but trees are not only as a peat, they're also help with a lot of the flooding and runoff. So if you have those root systems when it floods, when you have those plants built around it in the grass, that water can absorb more easily into the ground. So it helps maintain when we're having those flood events that water gets into those root systems and doesn't just create this greater flooding event that maybe we have rain days after that occur. So let's talk a little bit about what other cities are doing to address their parking issues. There has been a lot of different approaches we've seen nationally in some states when there's ordinance changes for parking. So we talked about parking minimums. Just to kind of reiterate on that idea, a parking minimum is a minimum parking. So we say you need 2 spaces per every theater seat that you have in your movie theater. You can't go below that. That is the legal minimum. It is illegal. It is against the code to go below that. So some cities, a common approach is to reduce those parking minimums. So instead of saying 2 per theater seat, they'll say, well, it makes more sense at 1. We've looked at demands that, a lot of studies have come out, and it'd be 1 per theater seat. So you're not requiring as much parking, but you're still requiring that. Another potential solution is you can get rid of the parking minimums. So no parking minimums. We're not going to tell you how much parking you need. You just build what the parking you need, and you're the decider of that. That is becoming more and more popular across the United States right now. Austin, Texas did it in 2023. I haven't seen any pushback yet on that, but they have done that effectively, and that is one example city that has done that. There's many others.
Jonathan, could you also, Norman, I believe, has done that. Any other?
Yes, so Norman did something a little bit creative. So they changed the word in their parking requirements to parking recommendations. So in effect, they still recommend the parking, but it is not legally required to do so. So yes, Norman down the road has also done that approach. Another strategy that some cities are going with is something called a parking maximum. This is effectively the mirror reverse of a parking minimum. So instead of saying how much parking you need, they say how much parking can you not have, or how much parking is too much. So if you were to build, your 100 parking spaces for a theater for your seats, they would say the parking maximum is 100 and you can't go over that. That is one approach. It's often used a little bit more nuanced and detailed within areas like downtown where they know walkability is, transit is also a common area. It's not done often very citywide, but it is one targeted approach that has been used by cities across the US to control that parking. And then there's the fourth option, and this is kind of very similar to a lot of the options, but you see this line right here. We call this parking flexibility, and essentially it's neither a minimum nor a maximum. It's a recommended amount of parking, giving developers and other businesses the ability to build below or above that line so they know how best to build their parking. But sometimes there's a little bit extra requirements of going above that line. Oftentimes it's kind of a recommendation without having a minimum or maximum in place. So, very briefly, we talked about that first Plan OKC policy about analyzing our parking based on location, based on demand, and we wanted to really talk very briefly about how we did that. A lot of going into this code, we wanted to analyze not only what nationally we were looking at as parking, but also what are we doing regionally? What are we doing locally? And I could probably nerd out all day on this, but I've been told to keep it short. But long story short, what we want to say is we did a lot of analysis on our parking in the city, and then compared it nationally. So this is an example of one of the processes we did. This is Rockwell Plaza, south of Northwest Expressway. And it might be kind of hard to see from back there, but I'll point out. So you'll see these lines right here. These are ownership lines for the lots. And each one of those lots has a land use. So up here would be fast food, right here fast food, maybe Target here for retail. And we took those lots and compared them with our planimetric pavement data. And we were able to get very good data on, estimating how many parking spots each of these uses have. So we pulled there are 28,000 parking lots in the city, and we started with 28. We didn't have a good data set. We didn't use the full 28. We kind of narrowed it down, but still a significant majority. But we had a lot of this information so we had a bank with 37 spaces. We knew the size of the bank. So we populated all this information. And I'm just going to briefly go over this slide. So what we did for each of these land uses here, so this would be for community retail, is we took all that data from those parking lots and plotted them out on a graph here. You'll see all those little dots. And we looked at, so what is the average rate as we're moving up in the area of the building and the number of parking spaces to see with that little blue line, it might be kind of thin, what is the average rate that we were seeing parking for our city. We looked at ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, for similar uses. You'll see all these little gray lines, and we kind of got an average of that for the red line. And so you can imagine from this purple line, we kind of got an average between the two, right? So what is the average number of parking spaces for these uses every 1,000 square feet? I did want to point out, I won't go into too much detail, but at the end of the day, when we compiled all those land uses and started looking at these rates, we looked at a lot of what commercial lenders were looking for when you're trying to build a commercial business. What's a good return on investment for how much parking you need? It mimicked those very closely. It was kind of great to see that, hey, our analysis is actually showing something that's mimicked in the real world of what is being required for parking right now from our market and commercial side. This is something I wanted to point out too. So we wanted to look at the size of parking lots. What's the distribution of parking lots? So if you look right here, 75 or less, 76 to 150, we kind of broke them out. More than 80% of our parking lots in the city are 150 or less spaces. We do have some larger ones over here that you can probably imagine in the city. Some examples, but the majority of our parking spaces are built at 150 and less. And Joe will talk a little bit later about how we use that analysis to kind of think about our regulations for landscaping. 40% of the parking areas served commercial properties, so commercial was very popular for parking, and then only 1% of our parking areas exceeded 750 greater spaces. Little fun fact on top of that is that if you look at our total pavement in the city, the parking spaces that are 750 or greater, even though they are about roughly 1%, they take up about a quarter of our paved area in the city. So while it looks like it's not a lot, they do take up a lot in terms of our paved surface. So let's talk about what we're proposing, why we're gathering here today to, now that we've given some preface on that and how we got there.
John, can we pause? Is there any questions, comments before we move on? See.
All right. So what are we proposing? There's three basic key things we're going to propose. So the first one is we are proposing to remove parking minimums parking requirements from all non-residential uses. So commercial, industrial, we will no longer be requiring the number of parking you're required to do for those. We are going to be, however, reducing our residential parking minimums. So we'll still have parking minimums for our residential, but we're reducing them to 1 per dwelling. And then this third right here, and we're going to talk a little about this one because it combines with these two, is we want to introduce something called a parking threshold. And if you were at the meeting in January, you might have an idea of that, but we're going to go through that and explain that to those who didn't get to attend in January. But it will be there to provide flexibility and help balance our parking needs, parking demands for different businesses with our landscaping requirements. So I'm going to read through this at the top just to kind of understand what a parking threshold is. So a parking threshold is a level where the number of parking spaces changes how much landscaping is needed. As buildings add more parking, they cross these thresholds. At each threshold, business owners must add more plants, trees, landscaping. These thresholds help balance parking and landscaping based on the building size, the LUDA land use typology area, and how the building is used, or the land use. Underlined right here, business owners decide how much parking they need. Knowing more parking means more landscaping. And so we have these two examples here. So you see as your building's getting bigger, as you're building more parking spaces, there's this threshold, that parking flexibility. But if you were to build above that, you can see, hey, you're getting more spaces, but there's a little bit more landscaping required for that. There is kind of a recommended identified line we have here. If you go below the threshold, great, you have some landscaping requirements, but you're going either below or at our recommended. I'm going to pause right here just to make sure we're all on board. Any questions about this? Does this make sense?
So in other words, I would say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think I need a more concrete example.
So in other words, if you have, so we've set that threshold, it's similar to what the parking requirements are now. In other words, if you build an excessive amount of parking, you have to mitigate the heat and the drainage and all those impacts by adding landscaping, trees specifically, because they do provide shade and so on. So that stuff on the, above the line is kind of excessive parking. If you build kind of a normal amount of parking, then it's kind of the normal amount of landscaping. That's a bit of a separate discussion that we need to have, like how much landscaping is too much for both of those categories, because you need to, we would like to actually require everybody to do a little bit more. Our city doesn't actually require all that much landscaping and parking lots compared to even our peers in our metro. So we think we want to increase that a certain percentage for just everybody. But if you go above that line and have an excessive amount of parking, we want to make that, we want to have those impacts mitigated. This is how Edmund does it.
And we do have an example in a couple of slides. We do have
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you just go ahead and go to those and then come back up? There you go.
So, maybe this is just the pitch to us, because we are supposedly a little more informed than others about stuff like this. I don't like anything that makes it sound like we're using landscaping as a punishment, or that we're, downplaying the need for a lot more of it everywhere.
The need for more landscaping? Or-
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Parking is expensive, right? I mean, just to build. I don't think most developers would need too much incentive to build less of it. If they could get away with building less of it, they would. I also would like to know sort of how we're going to, well, that's probably a very different question, but how we're going to implement this in the very large, barren parking lots that we have now. if we're gonna do this, then I would really like to encourage commercial infill on, Quail Springs or Penn Square or, so that, but if we're telling them, but if you do that, you're gonna, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I get what you're saying, and yeah, we've had similar thoughts and discussions. So I will say though, back to your former point, you would think that a developer would only build the parking that they need. But experience has shown, both here and across the country, that's not the case, because what they will do, not always, at least often is not the case. Because you own a certain site, you buy a chunk of land, say it's 12 acres and you only need 10. This happens so much, you're gonna build your parking lot, and what do you do with that excess land? Well, maybe eventually there would be, and in fact, this is Homeland and in the Northeast area is a fair example. They pave it as parking because that's cheaper in the long run. They don't have to maintain it, they don't have to landscape it. You've already got the paving machines out there, you pave the whole site. It's the cheapest thing to do because you don't have to put in landscape islands. You only do landscape islands to the extent that either the city requires it or your clientele require it because they want to go to a nice place and shop. So the incentive is actually to do more paving than is necessary, with the hope that maybe eventually you can sell it off as a pad site. And often that never happens. And so we get stuck with decades and decades of asphalt that is generating heat and all these things, causing drainage problems and everything. So what we're trying to do is...
Before we go any further,
Oh, sorry.
developers in the room agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I do.
I'd say to an extent, when you look at that site plan up there, the reality is that would never happen from the sense that you're not gonna put in a drive aisle and not put parking on one side of it. That's where the efficiency comes from in that layout. The layout just drastically changes.
To be fair, that's not what we're trying to show here is just the tree coverage.
I'm gonna say this is maybe a better example.
Would design it differently, that's a good point.
Yeah, but I don't know that there's any landscape plans that we're doing now, unless it is a retailer that has a specific requirement that is exceeding the number of parking spaces. More often than not, we're already using, it's kind of half dozen one, half dozen the other. You can say that we're using landscaping almost in a punitive way, but the code now, we take the 20% reduction on most projects anymore because of how overinflated the parking requirements are.
I think we can all agree with that they're overinflated. The other thing about this that I'll just say, I think it's going to be really, really necessary, thank God for Nate Claire, right, for us to be realistic about landscaping in parking lots. It's like, we have a whole lot of examples all over the city of epic failures of parking lot landscaping.
Janice, that's our next section.
Okay.
That's mostly
Because
enforcement. We don't, like if a tree dies, they go out and they cite the person and force them to put landscaping back in. There are clients and developers that will say, I don't care where you put it, the moment I get my CO, they're coming out, because I don't want it. And Oklahoma City does not do anything to penalize them after they get their CO.
That's something that we...
We all know all roads.
Yeah, because part of it,
Code enforcement.
part of it is, I'm sorry, Clay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Part of it is, and Joe will present it here in a couple of minutes, part of it is embedding certain design requirements in the ordinance so that what parking lot landscaping is installed is set up for long-term health and success. That's one aspect. And then we are also looking at how the city can improve, how we can be more effective on the enforcement part without adding a whole bunch of more resources. We have ideas on that too.
Well, I think
And then again, as part of that process, I think we need to be thinking about, commercial infill. If we're the fact that quarter of our, paved area is these giant parking lots. And so we just need to do something about that. And it may not be easy to do, especially since most of them are done through PUDs and that kind of stuff, but we need to come up with a strategy and a mechanism for that. It's gonna have to be.
Yes, and the ordinance covers that. I'm not sure if it's in this presentation,
The applicability is not in this.
but yeah, we can talk about that.
And one of the things that we added in the uses is, based on some of Clay's comments, was a neighborhood shopping center and a community, like we were looking at Rockwell Plaza, a community shopping center. And so we're hoping we can sort of calibrate, because we know those are, if we want the infill, that we can sort of use those two new uses to calibrate stuff better for them, because they're different than just, say, a bank, so that's.
Okay.
Yeah, just real quick, just throwing this out here, but I predict, and me and a million other people, we're gonna have driverless cars. I don't think it's a question of not if, but when. And I think you need to kind of put that in the whole deal. I can just see if I wanted to come to this meeting, I'm just using this as a silly example. I could order an Uber, a driverless car, whatever. And then when the meeting's done, I have them pick them up and take me home. I mean, it's gonna be, I hate the word paradigm shift, but it is. I mean, it really is. Another thing I wanna make a point about is on the landscaping, if you could somehow maybe incorporate that with detention, that would help too. You gotta detain. I mean, that's part of the problem, is you have all these parking lots and the water has to go somewhere, so you have to have a detention or retention pond. If you could maybe give some flexibility there to where the retention, you could use your landscaping. I think you can now, but maybe codify it a little more.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Like, the way we have it drafted currently is you're allowed a certain amount of trees just wherever, but you need to have a certain amount within the parking lot itself to shade the parking lot and reduce the urban heat.
I was so shocked when we did that urban heat study. Well, I'm trying to think, did we do a study session on that?
Yeah, T.O. was there.
When they presented that to us, I was so shocked, and maybe it just is my illogical brain, to find out that the difference between something that was shaded and something that was not, and that incredible increase in heat, is not feet or yards. I mean, it's like inches. If it's shaded, it absolutely is way, way cooler. I mean, it was just surprising to me. Yeah. And so, I think there's no way we're going to be able to make a significant impact if we're not actually shading the parking lots themselves.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, and we're trying to shift. Well, first of all, yes, and the map you saw was surface temperatures, like the temperature on the pavement. And what happened, that soaks in, it stays there, it radiates overnight. Phoenix has a huge problem with this, of course, but we want to get on top of it now because our city's only getting bigger and bigger, and that temperature just radiates out overnight and whenever, and it makes the entire city hotter. Not to mention just walking through an uncomfortable parking lot. I mean, as bad as that is, that's not really what this is about. It's about keeping our region cooler. And people, we get heat warnings all the time, and we want to we want to reduce that as much as we can. And so we're trying to go from, of course, why do we have these parking minimums? We have them because decades and decades ago, people got tired of getting their parking cannibalized by somebody else. And we know it's still occasionally an issue in planning. We see a planning commission, people, mostly residential areas, concerned about parking, which is why and that's something we want to talk about and get that one tuned just right. But for the most part, nowadays, across the country, it's really, especially in commercial areas, developers know what they're doing. They're going to get the right amount of parking. So we're a whole lot less concerned about that than we are with the impact of the parking. We feel like we're doing a paradigm shift, and regulating what really matters to us now rather than 50 years ago.
And I would say there's probably more developers now planning more landscaping to get the parking reduction than if this was approved as is, than developers that would have to plant more landscaping because they're going over on parking. So I don't know that it's like overly burdensome in whether comparing this one to the next one. There's already a certain amount of people that are having to spend more on landscaping to get what they want anyway.
That's what I was it sounds like that's what we're drilling into is getting the metric right, because the chart shows a straight line relationship of proportion, like we have a landscaping requirement for parking lots now, or there are landscape requirements for site development. And we talked about it in the framework of more parking is more landscaping, so that means we might be making that more of a curved ratio that gets worse the more you build. Whereas then, Mark, you're saying that's probably not going to do as much as you think because developers are already doing less, but it's about getting the metrics right so that maybe the thresholds are lower and then you go a little bit more and that you have to build even more landscaping.
I'll point out, this is a stylized diagram. It actually does curve like that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing, right? That's what we want.
And Mark, are you talking about in PUDs to get what they want, they're having to add
No, I'm
land?
saying like just per code, taking the reduction, and so it's for every one space you remove, you have to add one tree essentially. And so when we take off 20 parking spaces and you get 20 additional trees, there's already the development community that's absorbing additional landscape cost and not have to do more parking. I'm just saying when you flip it in this code, the handful of developers that want more than what's allowed are gonna have to plant more trees, but you're then not penalizing the people who are trying to provide less pervious or impervious cover. So it's shifting the burden, but the burden exists already. So you're burdening the people you want to burden.
Okay.
Well, and Janice, your initial question makes me realize, we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this threshold is and what magnitude of landscaping is appropriate, but in that is often lost the bigger picture of, but commercial developers don't have to do any of it. The way we're proposing it, you don't have to do any parking. If you want to, then there's some consideration. So I just want to point that out, that we need to, going forward, we'll be more strategic about, it's not so much about the penalizing larger lots, although that's a component. It's more about not requiring any more than anybody feels they need.
Edmond has a lot of issues in their landscaping code and their code in general. This is almost identical to how they interpret their code. Nobody cares about this piece of it because it says you can build the parking you think you need and you just landscape it appropriately.
You can build it or not, and if you build it, you landscape it.
Then you landscape it. I mean, they've got other issues, but that's not one of them. I don't know that you'd get much of any pushback on this. You might run into the occasional shields, right? Like, not them specifically, but the super large national tenant that comes in, but they're still allowed to do what they want to do. They just have to landscape better.
The amphitheater, man, they did not want to landscape their parking lot.
Oh my God, we dodged such a bullet on that stupid thing. I mean, we were ready to just like,
That drove a lot of what we're proposing.
But isn't it true, would it be true that it's by putting the landscape parking requirements in the parking section, it's easier to tie it just to the parking and distribute it throughout the parking and make those requirements built into that? So you can't just put it over here and park over there, you gotta.
That's exactly right.
The current parking ordinance does have, it basically is like, I think it's 75 feet radius, like you have to have a tree.
Slide or.
You have to have a tree within 75 feet installed. So we will be updating that, but yes, I mean, we want to make sure, like I said before, that we've got the right amount, shading, asphalt, and hard surfaces, but also allow some flexibility.
Yeah, Jonathan, why don't you continue? 'Cause
Yeah,
I think we're hitting most of the points of your next several slides.
Yes, and I want to save some time for Joe too, so I might go a little bit quicker through these, but if I need to slow down, just let me. So in terms of that line, that's the threshold, right? There was some discussion here about, well, how do we set that? What is that? There is a formula that's going to differ based on your development. So of course, gross floor area, the size of your building probably means more demand in terms of parking generally. That is going to be part of that. Just a little note here, if it's for residential, square footage isn't always as correlated to its number of dwelling units. We have something called a base ratio, so that chart you saw earlier in our analysis slides, each land use is going to have a base ratio. So you can think of the base ratio as what we've identified or what we think is appropriate number of spaces for your land use, grocery store, retail, etc., for per 1,000 square feet of your use. And then this is something I'll bring up here, the Luda multiplier, and I'll talk about that here in a second when we have that slide.
Wait, one second.
Jonathan, real quick, so just to clarify, current code essentially, could you put?
Back to sharing so that.
The current code, those first two terms are basically what the current code does. The last one is a new wrinkle because the data shows that depending on where you are in the city, if you're a suburban area, downtown, urban medium, the context varies how much parking you're gonna need. So that's what we're adding as a wrinkle on the end there.
So just to reiterate that base ratio, like I talked about, we did all this analysis, figured out, what is a general. This is just an example slide of some of those land uses. So we cut those up into low, medium, high, very high. Seems intuitive, fast food restaurants, movie theaters, very high. And then as you get down to daycares, hotels, warehouses, it would be very low. So that is a lot of when you see that draft, you'll see these numbers in those base ratios. But as Jeff was speaking earlier, one of the things we want to consider, because it is a big part of Plan OKC, is the context of the land use typology. And so we debated a lot about, how are we going to right-size parking in each of these LUDAs with, what's appropriate for that LUDA. What we have based on here is, so in the American Community Survey, US Census, there is data on how people commute. Do they drive alone? Do they carpool? Do they bike? Etc. And so we looked at those and we thought, well, that would be a really great way to understand what kind of parking we need for, vehicles. So right here you're seeing we merged urban low and rural together, urban high and downtown together. That's maybe a little harder to see. But essentially, this is our multiplier, but you can think of that as what the census was saying is how many people commute within a car. So in our urban medium, 90%, 100% urban low rural, and then down here it says 75%, and that would be the multiplier for our downtown and urban high. So that's a new addition on top of the area and the ratio of demand that we're just trying to right size those thresholds a little bit more as you get into some of the areas we're trying to make more appropriate to what Plan OKC calls out for.
So at some point in the future, not necessarily here today, I would like to know a lot more about that. I mean, the idea of the LUDA as the multipliers is a little problematic for me. So if it's however it is you're fine tuning that, I would like to know more about that.
Absolutely. So we went through these examples. We discussed a little. Were there any other? Oh, I did want to mention it's hidden down here. So we talked about, when we have developments come in that, sometimes they want 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 spaces, which in most cases is going to go above that threshold because that's a lot of parking. One of the things we've strategically done is structured garages. These thresholds will not apply for. So one of the ways that we hope that, as developers are looking at these landscape requirements, they'll start to see the costs and the additional trees, is that it will become, at a certain point, it will pencil out that a structured garage will make more sense economically for them for that many spaces.
We just dwell on that just for a little bit. I think that's a really good mock-up. Which one would you say, the left or the right, is more accurate to what exists today? I can't remember.
The left probably, and this was actually pretty well landscaped. There's some I think we added a few more trees. What's different here is we took out this area that you can see in here that's there today, so.
Where did the,
I'm sorry?
where did the detention pond go?
So there is a detention pond up here north, if you look at the satellites as it is today, but this was for illustrative purposes. We had a planning intern actually who was really good with Adobe help us, demonstrate these, and we thought, oh, there's this big, white space here, let's put something down there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be biofiltration or retention. It could be a pad site, a commercial pad site, for example. You could use that for a restaurant or something as well. But what it was trying to demonstrate is that, hey, you don't have to build as much parking, but if you do, there's going to be some additional landscaping to mitigate that.
Yeah, so it's illustrative, so I don't know that the trees there are necessarily exactly how the code would prescribe, but the point is that if you must have more parking, you've got to provide a lot more trees and landscaping to provide that shade, and when you're showing some shade structures, which, car dealerships have these days and some other people, but that's an option too. If it's a situation where you, for whatever reason, can't provide trees, shade structures are also good.
Does the detention pond go away on the right one, or because of all the landscaping, or is it,
Well, yeah, just kind of, it's just illustrative, so it doesn't, the detention basin it could be just, flat space, it could be a future pad site, it could be anything. The point was that we were trying to show, you don't actually need that much parking, but if you feel like you do, then you can do it, you just have a higher landscaping requirement.
Is the number of trees reflective of what the code would actually indicate, or is it like a graphical representation of it's just a lot of trees?
It's more graphical illustration. And we do have a calculator, and I think Jeff and Lisa, if you're okay with it for time, we're going to show this during Joe's presentation. But we will have a calculator with examples that will actually show what your threshold is, and then how many trees you're going to be required based on how many spaces you provide. So,
And I had one quick, I think you have fast food as an example on there. If you build at 23rd and Penn, your landscaping is less than if you build it at Memorial and Rockwell, because
Parking,
lower multiplier.
the parking threshold is slightly lower.
The parking threshold, not the landscape.
But ultimately, the landscape is driven by the parking.
if you're above or below.
Yeah, so if you exceed the threshold, then yeah, you'd be required to do more landscaping.
The threshold would be roughly about 90% of what it would be in the US.
So if you build 10 spaces at 23rd and 10 spaces on Memorial, you can have the exact same site plan with the exact same amount of landscaping. Would that be correct?
Not in all cases. There is some nuance with that multiplier.
And Mark, that's on our to-do list for the next week, is to get more side by side
Okay.
comparisons to make it easier for the folks who are developing these to attend.
And the multipliers aren't huge. I mean, it's not going to go from 10 trees to 500 trees or anything like
You
that.
go from like 10 spaces to 9 because we're setting at 90%. So
That's why we're here discussing this, because if you all think, yeah, that's reasonable, that, and that you probably only need 90% of the parking for the same use in the urban medium, but in the suburbs, then we would keep it largely the same. But if you guys feel like, and the other developers feel like, oh, you kind of need the same wherever you are, we can adjust those thresholds or we can adjust those modifiers, but the data seems to speak to us that, generally speaking, less parking is required in the urban medium for various reasons. All the, walkability, it's got transit, it's got sidewalks, it's got, streetcar, all the things. And the trips are shorter, various reasons, but that's a knob we need to turn.
I know we've had a lot of discussion. Do we we want to just skip that and get to Joe with the landscaping? Does that sound?
Can I just, I did almost bring up what did everybody think about the still requiring a minimum for residential? Does everyone think that's still important? Do they think that could be reconsidered?
Well, I was gonna say, I think that the reduction factor, the multiplier factor could be different for residential than for others. So in the urban medium, urban high, you might get a greater
Much greater.
a much greater reduction if you desire, but like when we're talking about suburban apartment complexes, like they need the parking more, you know, so the multipliers could vary for R versus others too.
I feel like we need a minimum because some cities just remove all minimums, but we, in our experience with the planning commission, we often enough hear from neighbors who are concerned about parking that we thought, probably should retain a minimum so that people are required to do something.
Well, I'm more extreme on my distaste of parking, so I think probably you could do a no minimum, but I do think you'd run into those same issues that we have. But on the flip side of that, the business development community, you know, knows what's right. And like if you're gonna build units that people are gonna wanna buy or rent, you gotta be able to park, or else you're not gonna be able to sell those units. So developers tend to kind of get that and do what they know they have to do.
I'm less worried about an apartment complex or, a large family, but it's more the infill projects that people are concerned about. Well, hey, this is great, it's going in my block though, and I'm concerned that they're not gonna.
Yeah.
You know, I have some experience just recently with several things, especially in Helm Farm, you know, that kind of look good on paper, and but maybe there are other ways to deal with some of that than parking. I don't know. Dan and I are probably polar opposites on this. He has more information and expertise on it than I do. I don't claim to have, you know, a strong view about how much it should be, but I would be pretty reluctant to let go of there being any minimums.
But I think one space per unit, that's kind of where we often end up in planning commission cases, these infill projects. You know, we don't do 1.5 spaces per bedroom. That's just way too much. And that's been shown in lots of different types of developments, big and small. But so yeah, I'm certainly not against having some minimum.
This is one of those places where it's just really hard for me. I know where the whole point of what we're doing here is to try to get away from micromanaging every case that comes in front of us, but especially in especially in the core, especially, you know, in residential, it's almost a lot by lot call. You know, it depends on the street. It depends on how much, you know, you live in a 100-year-old home, they're just guaranteed to be people they're fixing things all the time, and people they're mowing things all the time, and you know, your need for off-street parking is just, you know, very real. So it's almost easier to do it on a case-by-case basis than to try to come up with a rule.
So I guess I'm more in Dan's camp personally of build what you think you need. I don't know that we're ever going to really get effective public transit if we continue to ensure that every person living in a unit has the opportunity to own a car. It also makes the rent more expensive. But if, to Janice's point, I mean, I've been writing PUDs and SPUDs for 10 years. I think there's one case in those 10 years that we've gotten something lower than one space per unit. So that just seems like the politically acceptable calculation than try and fight a battle that you might not need to fight, because the reality is a developer, someone's gonna have a space right now, like, because they can't lease a unit, and I think there are a lot of units around town that are struggling that don't have parking. And I even think the parking standards in the suburban apartment complexes are still way too high. I don't think 1 to 1.5 on the fringe is unreasonable. That's probably where that one needs to end up too.
But I think I think the first question for me is what's politically palatable, and that's probably true when we're talking about the urban core as far as having a minimum, but I'm not convinced that's what should be proposed, because I don't think it's precise enough. I wonder if we can do more to try to figure that out of where it might be appropriate to just eliminate the requirement or have a lower requirement for infill. But I agree with you that using some kind of ratio or something in the suburban areas is true too, because I agree, like, it's still excessive. So
Mine's definitely anecdotal. I just think politically what's acceptable is what we've shown, at least over my time doing it, 10 years of the planning commission and the city council finding one per unit acceptable rate. Rarely, even with neighbors, do you get too much pushback on the one per unit. Because the reality, I'm sure if you look at the parking study, this is probably where it back you up, there's a lot more single households than there used to be. And so in a 500 square foot or 700 square foot apartment, you don't necessarily have 2 and 3 people anymore.
I know the way we do it as a practical matter, though, has, back to the Luda thing, maybe it's too big a frame. The way we do it as a practical matter is really how far is this from transit? And the standard that we are using, I can't even say for sure what it is, quarter of a mile or whatever, that's too far. But, you know, if I'm looking at one and it's like a block away from a transit stop, it's like, yeah, you know, easy to say. They probably don't need even one parking place per unit if you're talking about multifamily. So I don't know. This is tough. This is hard.
Yeah,
That's why we brought in the fast
The
chance.
one size fits all thing is where you trip up every time.
There is a line in the zoning code that I don't know that's ever really been used that I would think is gonna stay about, like, if it's determined you're not providing enough parking, the city can make you provide more parking.
yes.
That'd be up to our friends across the table of how realistic is that after you allowed someone to build something?
After it's built, yeah, no.
Spaces, but it is in there, but I don't.
Anticipated keeping that in there, because it is a kind of a fail-safe, you know, if somebody builds an amphitheater or something and has, you know, and the neighborhood is filled with parked cars everywhere, then, you know, it does give the city the ability, granted that would be extremely difficult, but it is a fail-safe.
Well, I mean, all you need to do is look at the area around the plaza right now, and, you know, clearly we're not using that fail-safe.
That one's a challenge because you have to prove which user is the problem.
Well,
In an amphitheater, you can point to it and go, you're not providing enough. In a commercial district, you can't go, well, Empire Slice House, they could be your patron, so we're gonna penalize you. You need to build that. That's where it gets tricky.
also who's concerned about it too, because, I mean, yes, there have been people show up in plaza area cases maybe that have parking concerns, but rarely, not very often. So if the neighbors that live in the neighborhood aren't really having a problem with the fact that people park in the neighborhood and there's activity, then is it a problem?
Do we ever go ask them? I mean, that's the thing. The plaza's maybe not a good example because we let that thing just get out of control before we ever thought about this. But, you know, this development and redevelopment of this area that was blighted, all these public resources and leverage and all of that, supposedly was being done to stabilize the residential area around it. It wasn't being done just because we thought it'd be fun. And now, I mean, have we ever gone back to ask those people whether they're happy it's there? You know, it's raised prices on property. A lot of those people are gone. The residents that were there, maybe we don't care about that were established in those neighborhoods for decades. You know, we've never gone back and asked them whether they're okay with the fact that people park in front of their house 7 nights a week and sometimes in front of their driveways. We don't have a mechanism to go back and monitor how good a job we've done.
Other than the protesters that occasionally come out when there's a
And we
plaza.
tell them routinely, sorry, but you know,
Well,
that when we rezoned it in the first place, you know?
I'm just one person, but my anecdotal evidence of
You
my
actually live
neighbors,
down there.
my neighbors on 18th Street, which is close enough to the plaza that we get the overflow parking. Nobody cares. Nobody has a problem with it. Nobody complains about it. Neither of my next door neighbors have an issue. We also have the church, I'm across from St. Francis, so the church parking on Sundays and Saturdays and certain other days. We get that, but I don't see it as an issue. But that's me. Not everyone agrees.
But you gotta ask, if you go back in time, would you have it the way it is today or the way it used to be? I mean, I think that's a slam dunk. We'd like the Plaza District to be as it is today, not when it was run down.
Well,
you know,
the third
25
option, I
years.
think, is we could have done a better job. I mean, yes, nobody would want it to go back to the way it was.
Right.
No, but, could we have done a better job of managing the growth and
But
providing?
who's perfect. I mean,
I think it's complicated too, by the general issue that folks seem to have with paid parking. Because the lot there is paid parking and the street parking will be packed and that thing will be empty. So I think that's a, issue that presents itself in downtown and in Plaza District specifically where there's parking, but am I willing to pay for it?
Right, and I think Janice raised, actually a really interesting point because it gets back to the political palatability of it. Plaza District has probably had enough turnover in the residential neighborhood that they're all moving to what they would consider the nuisance and they're fine with it. But when you do look at the Western Avenue District, those neighbors are much more vocal about parking demands and parking requirements because it's been a more long tenure resident neighborhood. And so I don't know how you do it. I still think Western shouldn't maybe have as much parking as sometimes we require, but that's the political side that if you do one broad brush, Plaza's not gonna care, but Western probably is gonna care a whole lot. And that probably unfortunately has to do with income levels and people that have the means to fight things, and what we see every other Tuesday, but.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Joe is going to share some excellent information about new landscaping requirements.
But wait 1 second.
In 1 second.
So what I'm going to talk about, three major points for you to know. I think it's going to fill in some of the gaps in what your questions are and help answer that. I will talk about soil volume. I'm going to talk about landscape tree requirements that we've been mentioning, and also going to talk about design areas.
Are we doing all landscaping or just parking related here?
Only parking. So even though I'm a beautification planner, the goal is not to have more trees because they're pretty, it's to reduce urban heat. I mean, I think that's the number one with the bullet, and all these other things are really important too. We're providing flexible design options, improving air and water quality, ensure tree survivability. That's also very important. Clear, easy to read regulations. That's key to us because I think if you've read our current ones, it's a little confusing at times as to know what's going on. We currently have this point-based system. As talked about earlier, we have about 75 feet requirement from the tree to cover any parking space. And that allows you to put trees to one side and not really serve our objectives. So this requirement is not really creating a lot of shade. That is to say, it's not reducing our heat island. It's not really doing its fair share of reducing that, I think, which is just the most important. It's also not giving us enough soil. Soil volume for trees, as we've talked about, is critical to making sure trees survive. Again, it was referenced that we've all seen trees that were planted and the developer did not care afterwards about how they survived. And so we're trying to address that as well. And so I'm going to be going through these probably a little bit quicker just for the sake of time. If you feel you have questions, please feel free to stop me and ask. So we started doing research. The focus group had 12, industry professionals for landscaping. Again, mostly we're talking about trees today for this. We talked about best practices from around the nation, and then we talked to our peer cities to see like what actually has worked as well. One of the important things for me, like I said, is that soil volume. So if we looked at the graphic to the left, I think probably everyone in this room has a good sense of how trees grow, how the roots actually grow. Those lateral roots growing inside, not so much of the tap roots that keep going down, down, down. So that shows that we really want to make sure we're getting the soil volumes right for each tree. So our new system is kind of soil volumes based on size, tree size classification. So we currently have 3 sizes listed, and this is going to be mirroring that. So we have small, medium, and large, and you can see the soil volume requirements here, cubic feet, 600 cubic feet for medium, 900 cubic feet for large. You'll also notice that these are placeholders for what the design is. You see these X's, there's a lot of flexibility in how you achieve that soil volume for those trees. I think that's really important too. We've incorporated flexibility into this draft. I'm not quite as good a presenter as Jonathan, so I have my cheat sheets here. I did try to dress like him so that...
You're doing great, Joe.
Yeah. So like I was saying, there's flexibility. So this would count. We can make this count. This is just an example. We're not saying you have to use structural cells or other structural soil underneath, but this allows for, if you meet your soil volume requirements, you can see underneath there is the proper soil volume for this tree. You don't have to have that open space the same way. It allows you to put that tree in the middle of the parking lot or the parking area if you desire. And I think this is what a lot of you have been waiting for. This is a big scary chart sometimes, and we can have a calculator that's gonna tell you. So Johnson told you that we're gonna get you to how many, your threshold of above or below for your parking requirements, and then we're gonna get you to how many trees are actually needed for that threshold. Several things to note, this is cumulative. So if you look 1 or greater, 5 or greater, 150 greater, it goes down. So those are going to stack. And so if you have 4, if you're at threshold and you have 4 parking spaces, you have to have 2 trees, and then additional 1 for every parking spaces, so a total of 3 trees. And you'll have time to really pick through this once you get the draft so that you understand exactly what's happening. But another thing to point out is, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, I think 83% of all businesses have less than 150 parking spaces. So those top 2 columns, I think, is really what most developers are going to be looking at for businesses. So yeah, you're probably already familiar with this, or looking at this chart where we have at or below threshold and then above threshold, and you can just note the numbers are kind of increasing up. Again, we want to make sure that the heat island is reduced in proportion to your desire for parking lots, spaces.
So, a couple things. Well, Joe, could you maybe just talk about the soil volume? Excuse me. Not the soil volume per se, but could you talk about the focus groups that you had with with our experts locally, and just kind of how that?
Yeah. So we probably had 3 different focus groups with those landscape professionals, be the arborists, urban foresters, even landscape architects. And one thing that became abundantly clear is we aren't setting trees up for success right now. We're not doing any service. We could put trees in. Is that tree being put on top of a parking lot, or is it just what's underneath that tree? Is there soil? Is there not soil? It was installed correctly. So what we're proposing is to make our installation standards meet the industry standards. So our new installation standards are going to meet ANSI A300s and other nursery stock standards for trees, so that we're going to see the best practice here. That's really the goal. And we're gonna see trees getting the support they need so that those roots have space to grow, so they're gonna get the proper water, even if there's not an irrigation system, because there's enough space.
And message received, we were talking earlier about how we know we have a problem with developers installing trees that are really never meant to survive long-term. And so that's something that's I prioritized to get this figured out. The city has limited resources, but what we can do, we've got some ideas for inspection/auditing, either at planting, so we see that it's done right, or after the fact, or both. We've got some ideas that we don't have time to talk about today, but it will involve another staff person or two to help us get these inspections done to make sure, these things are being set up for success, like Joe said, the trees are in the landscaping. So, I'm excited to kind of tackle that because it is an issue that we need to deal with. We have so many areas around the city, stunted, dead trees, where if you were to pull it up, you probably just pull it up with your hand and, it's just planted in road base with a couple inches of topsoil. So fortunately, not everybody does that. A lot of people do it right, and we're fortunate that they do. But we have very limited ability to ensure that it does happen right. But if we're doing the soil volume right and doing the design right, then we'll have a lot better luck with trees surviving and mitigating our urban heat.
Joe, another big thing you learned from the focus groups, I believe, was that parking lots are the most hostile place you could plant a tree. Like, even under the best of circumstances, they're challenged. So when you see the draft, there's not just soil volume, but distance to pavement and some incentives to get larger medians and islands so that there's a little more of an ecosystem there. I don't think we go through it in very much detail here, but when you're reading the draft, one might think maybe it's overkill a little bit, but it's in response to all this information we've learned on if you don't do it all, you might as well not do any of it, because that's the reality. Don't ignore the reality.
Like, we could require all large trees, but if we don't have enough soil volume, that large tree will only maybe get to a small tree size. So.
Yeah, that kept coming up over and over.
It was amazing.
Tree, but it didn't have the right soil volume. It's never going to reach its full potential in there. Give that shade that we need.
Do you have a comparison graphic of what this means? That my first blush is that the addition of the trees isn't too much, but I think structural soils and silvicells, and I could find the number because we just did this on one. We talked with Ken about it. There's a balance between what landscape architects will say is best practice, and then there's what is actually affordable and achievable, particularly in urban areas. Because if you go that route, you basically start saying, you're not going to allow 5x5 tree wells anymore. And there are trees all over downtown that are massive and big and have existed in these smaller tree wells without so much structural soil and without silvicells. And I don't know how you work out good urban street design with the quantities that are being shown.
No, that's a fair point, and again, a reason why we're here with this group, because there is the recommendation for the ideal scenario for trees to thrive. So I think that's a fair point. Though one of the ways that we make it easier, I think, in the code for the developers is, and we see this often around town and in other cities too, where if you plant your trees in a row in an island, that gives them. It's easier and less costly for a developer than doing an individual island for each tree and that sort of thing. You have to curve around, they can share soil volume and so on. So the code does anticipate that in the design standards. That is a fair point, and one of those knobs that we need to adjust potentially if it's just like, well, I get it, but that's too much, it's unaffordable, we can never do that. What is something that's lower, but yet still retains a high chance of tree survivability? I mean, just in my neighborhood, like, I've got 2 elm trees in my front yard, and of course I take care of my trees. Well watered when they were young, all the things. Those trees are planted at roughly the same time as there's this landscape island where you enter my little part of the subdivision, right? There's like 3 trees that are just kind of like sad looking because they're in an 8-foot thing. I don't know, I've never dug around there, but clearly something didn't go right. They weren't taken care of when they were young. Maybe the soil volume was wrong, maybe the dirt was wrong, but there's just such a huge difference between my trees that are planted at the same time roughly and those, which are these trees that are stunted because they were designed to be medium trees, but they're small trees and scraggly looking. So yeah, it makes a huge difference, but we want to get it right, something that's not extreme from a developer's perspective as well.
Did you include the installers in your focus group, the contractor, not just the designer?
I'm not sure if we had.
I think like the green shade, total environment, I think they'd be able to help you get a better cost benefit ratio, particularly in the.
We're not requiring the silva cells, that's just an option.
You could choose just to put a curbed 8-foot or whatever, 8 by whatever. You could just do it that way, like a lot of developers have done.
And there's substitutions, let's get to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's a lot of substitutions.
Silva Cell was just like, hey, if you want to maximize your parking stalls, you have options. You can park on top of that area.
Are you saying that silva cells are more expensive? Is that?
Oh, God.
Wildly more expensive.
These poor landscape architects, they always try to get them in there to make the trees thrive, and they always get eliminated from projects. The number of times I've seen them on paper, but they never get built out with silva cells, I can't even count.
Well, we have a fair amount of them in the Project 180, and that was a cost issue. Some areas didn't get them because of cost.
So I think we're going to save the calculator examples till the end.
No, we'll do it now, right?
I was gonna say, yeah, let's,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead and finish your presentation, then we'll spend the rest of the time on the calculator in question.
So back to parking area requirements, the landscape area requirements. This is more flexibility. These are some of your substitutions that we allow as proposed now. Your stormwater infiltration areas, your light color shade structures. We're making sure that we're not adding any additional heat, maximizing that. And an existing tree, my personal favorite, preserving those existing trees on site. This illustration, again, is just showing other options of what can be used. There's going to be a lot of flexibility in how you design your parking lot. Now we're on the parking area design specifically. I think you can see here that 75 spaces is kind of where we're requiring that design. So if you have less than 75 spaces, there's no design requirements. We'd like for you to sort of mimic what we're proposing, but there's no requirements. If you look at that first chart that Jonathan showed early on, about 67% of all businesses have fewer than 75 spaces. So again, you have about 2/3 of all businesses would not meet the design requirements. They wouldn't have any specific design requirements. You would have your tree total, and you find the space in your parking area for the trees. It wouldn't be requiring for landscape medians or terminal islands. I think that's important to know. The terminal islands, I think it's kind of blocked out there in that bottom bullet point. The shape and size are determined by your soil volume requirements. There's no design or width maximums or minimums that you have to have for an island, and landscape medians as well. I'll keep going through so you can see everything. More flexibility. I think this is my favorite thing of, Jeff was talking about earlier, planting trees closer together, letting them share nutrients, letting them share space, is now part of your options. Right here, you can see this because in Flower Mound, we have a consolidated tree planting area. And so, again, if you have more than 75 or more spaces, this is an option for you. You can always do consolidated planting area, but this is one of those flexible options if you have constraints that don't allow you to meet all the specs that are being required. You can do a consolidated planting area.
Instead of the medians and all that, if you want that way.
You still have to have trees throughout the parking lot.
Yes.
No, well,
Well, I guess it depends on how many trees you have.
it depends on how you can space the trees, but you do however you want to do it.
So if you're required 10 trees in a parking lot, I could put them all in one area and not landscape the rest of the lot?
That would be too small of an example, because they wouldn't have to.
There's 100 parking spaces.
Yeah.
I put all my trees in one big area, and I don't have to landscape anything else in the lot. How does that help with the?
100 parking spaces hit the design standards, so that's when you start these.
Yeah, that's when you kick in, so yes, you have to have trees.
You can't just put them all on one side. That's when the design standards kick in.
So if you have 74 though, if you have 74 parking spaces, then all of your trees could be in a grassy area, kind of in the middle, and then concrete all around.
Right.
Don't you have a picture of almost that?
We took that out because we determined that it was an important and it didn't quite represent what we were trying to convey.
Exactly. Yeah. Before this one, they had a picture of the big area and then this big L of concrete. And I was like, well, I guess that's what the code says.
Right, so that's will be a deficiency, right?
Maybe even-
Because the code is adopted.
I guess it's a deficiency on who you are. It seems like if you're trying to reduce urban heat island, you want the trees spread throughout the lot, and you don't want to encourage people to just save a swath and shove them all in.
Well, yes, but yeah, it's spreading them out and not giving them enough space and not letting them feed on each other is not helpful. So we're trying to find that balance.
Yeah, but yes, we've noted, I mean, I share your skepticism. We're trying to balance the need to keep the trees healthy and give flexibility with the desire to shade every square inch of the parking. That would be the ideal. These do provide some benefit in terms of like, they help, the heat kind of emanation that we talked about earlier. So it's cooler under there. Generally speaking, over the course of a site, you're gonna see that it's cooler and it contributes less to the urban heat. But the ideal is, like you're saying, to shade the asphalt to the greatest extent possible. So we'll look at that as one of those knobs we might tweak, like do we need to require more of those trees to be in the parking lot?
Like, you're still gonna have to do pedestrian walkways if you're a really big parking lot, and that would require landscaping in those areas. So there'll be some landscaping spread out, but what we heard from the focus group was, we would rather these things survive if you're gonna plant them than be dinky and.
Well, I think that's a bare minimum. I mean, that's, yeah, we got to start from there.
Did they say whether or not irrigation was a bigger contributing factor than the fact that it's just planted in a parking lot? Because most places just use gator bags and then they don't water them.
Establish, you're saying?
Right. Because you can plant it, but if you don't have a store employee going out there and putting water in the gator bags, it doesn't matter.
And that's,
There are irrigation requirements already.
But I'm saying like, the irrigation requirement is it's within 300 feet of a hose bed. That still requires someone to go
Somebody
out
to actually do it.
and water it, and you don't enforce the maintenance of it, so.
So you're saying more irrigation should be required rather than letting.
There's probably a contractor or the contractors who also maintain it could probably tell you how to get them to live more so than just the planting, soils and everything else in the beginning. There's ways to keep them healthy.
There's ways to get them off to a very good start, water-wise,
I'm sure that's why the trees in Project 180 that don't have subsidies have probably still thrived, because I think they were all irrigated.
Yeah, I know.
But if they keep having to be penalized by having to replace the trees when they die, by enforcing that, that would incentivize better intensive irrigation, wouldn't it? Right. Maybe that's the.
When you say irrigation, you mean a sprinkler system?
Yeah.
We put ours in because we want them to live, but I mean, I don't know, because we do it as a requirement of the city to have an irrigation system.
It's a requirement to have irrigation, but they leave it up to you in terms of the type. So not everybody does a drip line. Some people just wrap those green bags and expected it, like a store employee, to go out or water into it. But I mean, nobody does that.
Yeah, well, so, and that's where the inspections and the enforcement come in, so, and that's, the plan is to actually get that function. So, this is my question, like, if we were to, like, should we require that just everything is irrigated? Or would it be sufficient if we have an inspection process where we go out and after 3 years, if your trees are dead, you've got to replace them, and we just keep doing that until they survive? That would allow people to do a gator bag system and to save cost on the irrigation, but would that be doable? You think that would work? Would that incentivize people to actually keep their trees alive?
I would think if you have an inspection department that says they actually have the capacity to go to every single property every 3 years and do it, I like the idea that there's flexibility and you can water your plants however you choose to, that you don't have to run a system twice a day and waste water, you go out when you need to. But I don't know, is it reasonable in a city of 620 square miles to hit every property every 3 years, or 5 years?
Well, that's why our latest discussions are to do it as an audit system, because we can't do it every tree.
So you would be taking a risk. You'd have auditors that would go out and just proactively look at, after 3 years, okay, I've got a list of projects that I need to go inspect 20% of them. And also we'd have we do now, a complaint system where they could go out and complaints. But I don't know, I've seen too many gator bags around dead trees in the city to.
I tried using one and then it didn't fall my tree. I didn't put enough water in it. And it went out too fast. I don't know.
I mean, there are developers that will put a hose bib on a certain part of the building because it achieves that requirement, because it's cheaper than running irrigation hose. But then it doesn't get watered and the tree dies.
And as you said, some of those developers want the trees.
A lot of the industrial
They
ones,
literally do not.
Penalty.
but the industrial ones, they don't want the big semi trucks having to go around islands with trees in them. So they want them to die, so then they can just run over where that island was, because eventually the current will just pound down and.
Okay, Joe's going to finish up here so we can get to the calculator.
So yeah, these are other draft topics that we're working on, paving and parking stall standards.
Well, I want to know more about that, not today,
Yeah, well, these are also, I mean, we have all this whole, the draft's about 17 pages, but we also are still having in the parking chapter what we have now, which is about residential trailers. We've approved that, made that clear to understand. And then we've added some pervious paving standards, because it's not very clear right now when and where you can do that, especially in residential areas. And then, of course, we have off-street loading requirements. We've kept them the same, but y'all let us know if not. So, just mentioning that there's other topics in the parking chapter.
Well, I think we have some questions too.
Let's do the calculator.
Okay.
Let's do the calculator first.
Calculator. All right. Well, I'm excited to show this off because instead of looking at numbers and having to do a lot on paper, I actually have a calculator that we've been using for test cases. So we've all had a lot of discussion here around certain land uses. Does anybody want to throw out an example that we can use for this?
Fast food.
Fast food, all right. Let's find restaurants. Oh. Restaurant, all right. How big are we gonna have this restaurant built at?
3,000.
3,000?
2,500 square feet.
Yeah, 3,000.
3,000.
You said 23,000.
No.
You guys.
Something coming out of Texas. And then we wanna have a Luda.
Can we toggle back and forth so we can see?
Let's do one and then the other.
All right, let's start with urban, low, and rural. So we got a restaurant that's at 3,000 square feet in the urban, low, and rural. We're gonna hit calculate. And so here's our threshold for that 3,000 square foot restaurant. So if I wanna be below or at the threshold, I would go 1 to 30. And if I'm above the threshold, I would be 31 or greater to jump into that. Now on top of that, as Joe discussed with that table, we also have the added functionality here of now we know what our threshold is, how many spaces do we want to put for that restaurant. So let's say, for example, I want to build at the threshold. I see that number, that sounds good for my small little restaurant. So I'm going to calculate my landscaping requirements. So it tells us we're below or at the threshold for those 30, and that requires 8 trees. So for my 3,000 square foot restaurant in the urban low, 30 spaces, I'm required to do 8 trees.
Is this the only landscaping requirement for this project?
No, the parking lot.
This is just for the parking lot.
What's the rest of it? Like, it's hard to know whether this is like good, too low, too high.
That's why we're trying to wait to get both of these, the parking and the landscaping draft together, so you can review it together.
But in the landscape code, you'll get points for those trees, just like you do now. So we'll have to calibrate those point levels.
You think it's gonna stay the same like site point calculation then? How it is now? Like one for
We're gonna use the 200 number. Right now you divide the whole site by 200.
Right.
So we could still do that, but if you're saying, well, I'm already putting a lot of, my parking lot's probably one of my biggest areas, right? So do we wanna just do it by the building size? That's what we're trying to figure out. After they do this, what's the rest of the landscaping?
So in this scenario, the parking lot requirement's only 3 additional trees than what the current code would require. Right.
In the parking lot, you mean?
In the parking lot.
You might still have streets to get buffered.
Yeah, so going from 5 to 8, yeah. 5 to 8 trees in the parking lot or immediately adjacent to it, yeah.
Remind us, what are these variables, 10 and the 1.0 and the doing in this formula?
So this is what we presented on earlier. I don't know if you're in the room or not. So there's a formula for setting these parking thresholds, right? So if you're below or at the threshold, we have a landscaping requirement. But if you go above that threshold for the number of spaces over what we identified as being appropriate for your land use with a lot of analysis, then we have an additional extra landscaping requirements on top of that.
So the 10 and the 1 and the 3,000. So the 3,000 there is just like the current code does. That's the square footage of your restaurant. And it's dividing it by 1,000 because that's how it's set up, like per 1,000 square feet. That's what the requirements are. And then remind me, Jonathan, what the 10 and the 1 are.
The 10 is your base ratio for restaurants. So
Okay, so
restaurants were interesting is that they were very small, but they had a lot of parking because they packed the tables.
And then 1 is the Luda, because we're in urban low, there's really no multiplier basically.
So it's just saying, you need 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet. You're in urban Luda, so that doesn't change anything. So if we were to change that to urban medium, it's now
27.
a little bit less per 1,000 square feet. So because all it changes is you take it down by 10% or so.
Under this, you could build 10 or 0 and you're not penalized.
That's correct.
So what is?
The penalty comes a little bit sooner in urban medium, goes from 30 down to 27.
Keep the same
We
number
think
of
you can
spaces,
park.
and see how it changes the trees just by being an urban medium, or does it?
Oh, for 30, well, you do go above the threshold for urban medium at 30.
Oh,
So instead of 8 trees, you're required to do 13 trees.
See?
You effectively keep the parking ratios in the current code what they are today to establish the baseline.
No, so that's back to they're similar. So what, those lines that Jonathan was describing, I don't know if, I'll go back to that, Jonathan, but basically to put it simply, we kind of averaged what is currently on the ground in Oklahoma City with the ITE requirements, so the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And that's pretty much where we set the threshold. So if you were a small developer and didn't want to really bother with like how much parking do I need, you can pretty much rely on this calculator. It's going to give you a pretty good number for that's the amount of parking I need. And if I don't go above that, then I'm good. If I feel like I need more parking, then fine, just put in more trees. So those different lines are just the ITE parking rates and compared with what we actually see on the ground here. That's what all the dots are and so on.
So I take it on your restaurant use, the reason you don't have fast food you don't have a Brahms versus a Charleston's is because there's not a minimum, so you effectively don't care if Scooter's Coffee doesn't build any, or if Scooter's Coffee builds 30, they just have to landscape accordingly. That's why there's no.
well, scooters is a different use than restaurant.
McDonald's or Chick-fil-A versus you don't care because it's no longer a minimum that you're trying to.
Well, but they're gonna have to count their drive-through spaces as parking spaces. That's the difference. If you're a drive-through, all your queuing is gonna be a parking space in this.
So if there's a
If I
drive-through.
put in 30, that would include my drive-through spaces.
How does the calculator take that into account?
You just say, okay, I have 25 parking spaces, and then I have 5 queuing spaces, so that my total parking count is 30.
We might need to add that to the calculator, Jonathan, queuing space. It says in the code draft.
It's in the code, yeah.
I know, but it's to add it here.
How many
A lot of things
how many
to add
queuing
them.
spaces, if any, yeah.
Accessible spaces count.
But there are requirements that trees have to be within a certain space of parking, but no queuing counts.
No, well.
Like with the 75 feet.
Yeah, the 75 feet.
That's gone.
Old code,
That's all gone. So now you don't care where in the parking lot the trees go.
Correct.
Like they
Except,
can all go in one.
well, no, except the design standards, you might have to provide, if it's a big one, you might have to provide so many medians or terminal islands, depending on.
Yeah, the design
Terminal islands wouldn't apply to it. I think that's where I'm getting at. It was a queuing. If you're queuing 15 cars in your parking lot, how are you providing terminal islands in a queuing lane?
Would there ever be a use where,
A little technical.
would there ever be a use where there are over 75 spots though?
I mean, I guess you can.
It would be in the rest, it would be in the rest of your.
It would be the rest of this parking lot, but yeah.
Well, typically a queuing lane, you'll have, you'll be next to the boundary of the landscape boundary and you plant, typically trees are planted there. I mean, that's just kind of what I am envisioning from the queuing lanes I can think of, but.
Is there a code draft out?
Let me just cover that
It's
down.
coming,
Yeah, so a lot of this is in the design, so as you're aware, of course, the current code has design standards and so on for tree spacing, tree location within the parking lot, when you are supposed to put in, a pedestrian aisle, and it talks about the islands themselves and so on. So that's in the current code, it's updated, it's gonna be, we have the draft, yes, we do. We are going to get that to you all in 2 weeks or less, because we wanted to get your feedback today. We've got a few things that we've taken note of to follow up on. And we have a little bit of testing. We have a few more just refinements we want to make, a little bit more testing we want to do. So Yeah, we'll get that to you in 2 weeks or less.
And we're trying to figure out when y'all get the drafts that you can have the calculator to play with, so you can see what would happen.
And the draft includes the soil calculations that every tree has to have.
Yes. And we would appreciate your feedback and, if you want to talk to whoever about it and get opinions. We want to,
Into the last.
as we discussed, we want to make sure that the threshold, the mitigation measures, I don't want to say penalty, but I'll say it in this room, the extent to which we're penalizing people for exceeding the threshold is appropriate, not too severe, but enough to make a difference. So that's a knob that needs to be turned, potentially. That's what we'd appreciate feedback on that.
I think this is where, I think you can call it whatever you want, but a drink and draw with the right people in the room. But I think you need the rest of the regulations to know whether or not street tree regulations, the site regulations, and the parking. And get actually people in the room who are doing landscape plans that aren't just the landscape architects. Put them at different tables, let them design to it, and see what you end up getting, and have someone who's going to act as a reviewer of where it's compliant and where it's not. Otherwise, just reviewing a code, it's easy to get feedback or potentially find holes or things about it, but knowing what you're actually going to get, I think.
Yes, I agree. So, and to your point, so we will release to you this parking code, which is landscaping internally to the parking lot. And we have received valuable feedback. I think there's enough, it's independent enough that I think you all can see and give us valuable feedback and help us turn those knobs. We also have a draft landscaping code, which we will come forward with. And once we get all the public process that we're going to be doing this fall, and get our conceptual base zones for residential especially kind of more formulated, then we'll come back with all of it. And at that point, we'll say, probably with ULI, I'd imagine, it'd be great to have some, and we talked about that in the past, and with whoever, let's have some, call it drink and draw. Choice, and we would have people, whoever wants to participate in that and just be able to say, okay, now I've got all of these requirements. I can see how the landscaping interrelates with the parking lot and see exactly what it means precisely. And we'll probably be able to tweak some more.
I like the idea of we take previously approved landscape plans in different parts, and have people redesign it under a new code, and you actually see what the difference was. And I mean, on the ULI side, we'll follow your lead in terms of the timing you want it. Because my ask or recommendation would be that you don't wait too long while the code's out there. It'd be better to get some of this feedback handled, and then you actually, the people at the table supporting it while you're going through the process, to say, we as landscape architects, we as installers, planners, engineers, we're okay with that. Because we were involved early enough, not while the public was already clamoring, saying something was wrong.
Yeah, no, great.
And the other piece is this, what Janice is talking about, where we have all these lots that are, what are we gonna do with all these existing lots that retrofit them, and so applicability is a big piece of where does parking lot landscaping apply and where does other landscaping apply, and do both apply, so, and remodels and at what point do I have to dig up that parking lot and fix it?
Right, and in the latest internal draft, we have applicability, and that would be in what you see, and we really need your input on if you think it's too aggressive, because it's pretty aggressive, because our feeling is, if given its importance that we reduce the heat island and the runoff, it's a pretty small threshold of remodel before you have to update your parking lot. And I think that's gonna be a political challenge. I mean, we put it in that way because we feel it's so important, but we'll extra need your input on it.
That's in there now, though, right?
Yeah, it is current in the existing code. It's relatively small. It's not really enforced.
But
You just
I think
have to add a few more
like the
points.
narrative, what you're trying to do is not wildly different than the code we have now. You guys just aren't enforcing and inspecting the code. So it's like telling the development community, hey, if you start with the narrative that the applicability piece, like we're gonna make you do it, you're probably gonna get pushback. Whereas it's already in the code and you're not changing it, so do you need to talk about it?
Yes, because we plan to enforce it. I mean, it's
start-
gonna make this really happen.
Yeah. Nothing needs to change for you to start enforcing the sections of the code.
Yeah, there are some things that you're correct, yeah, it's just, there are some things that aren't gonna be all that different, it is just a matter of enforcement. So yeah, but speaking
I
of.
just don't want you to get hung up with like people fighting, going, that's too narrow. We don't,
And
we
you're
hate
like,
that.
well,
You're
it's
like,
already there.
It's already in the code, we're not investigating
Well,
something
should I
that's
say,
been codified.
I think we have a little bit more teeth in there to help, say, plan review, assess, okay, when does this remodel actually trigger parking lot improvement?
Yeah, and speaking of politics, just wanted to point out that this is one of those sections of the code, so most of the code that we'll be adopting hopefully next year will be related to the urban medium. But this is one, parking, landscaping, uses will be citywide. So as you saw, there's urban low in there. So this will be covering developers of all stripes, and where they develop in the city in all wards. So it's something good to keep in mind as you're going through it.
I think it's really hard as somebody who's not a subject matter expert, and I appreciate the explanation today and getting to learn a lot more. But I really want to go back to Mark's point about the sip and draw, whatever, drink and draw, whatever example. It would honestly, and I know it's hard, I know we're missing, it sounds like we're missing some people in this meeting today, but it would seem to me like maybe our process changing just a little bit, where we would allow those people, that select handful of people that have more direct knowledge about the issues and how the enforcement would go, all of that, having a meeting, a pre-meeting before we even had this meeting to talk about it. Like, it would have been more, to me, for those of us who are not experts in some of the nuances, like the soil count, like, I'm sure Clay knows about development, but the soil issues and the, you know, might be a little bit much. Like, I know some things on the policy side, but I don't know anything about, you know, several of these other examples. It might be more beneficial to have heard that feedback, the more concentrated feedback first, before even bringing it back to this group. That's a much broader representative group. The other thing that I think is probably important for us to figure out how to address is, like, what is the fiscal impact of better enforcement? I'm increasingly concerned as we see all these things, and I'm for it, so I'm not making it sound like I heard anything today that I think it's great, a lot of the suggestions, but I am concerned that we're creating a regulatory framework that we have no ability to actually enforce, because then we're wasting our time too.
In a sense, we're not. So as we've discussed, the city cannot consistently enforce on every development. You know, it's like our code enforcement. Our zoning enforcement is the same way. It's by complaint typically, unless the city council has in some cases directed proactive enforcement. So that won't change unless we come up with some more money and get a few more positions. But that's not really, so that's kind of, you know, a separate but important issue. And as I said earlier, I committed to coming up with at least an auditing system whereby developers, and that's 1 to 2 positions, which is doable. And if we do that, developers, property owners, if they choose to let their trees die, they know they're taking a risk. sooner or later, the city's gonna come around and say, hey, you need to replace these trees, and now we're gonna follow you more closely. It's like taxes, just the threat of an audit is often sufficient to covers a lot of ground. So we don't necessarily need to inspect every single one, and that's something that we can do that's more affordable than having somebody go out and be there when they're digging the hole and putting in everything that they're showing on their actual plans. That would be a tall order to both do that and then show up 3 years later to do a full inspection and in the middle of that, show up at the C of O and measure every tree and all that kind of stuff. So we just can't do a lot of the things that some cities do because we have quite a bit less staff than other cities, peer cities
And
do.
a lot more square footage. I mean, it's just a huge city.
And this is just a process thing, so I'll look to more senior council members here, but it almost seems like as we're thinking about getting the code passed by council, that it might need to come with an attachment of, if we want this thing, higher standards for character in neighborhoods and how we are, demolition review, whatever, you need this many new staff. Like, this is the actual cost of making this decision. Because it seems to me like we could have a whole battle and get this passed, and then we're still in the same boat we are in now if we don't have any mechanism to ensure we can do better. And I appreciate hearing that you already at least have in mind that there's a few new positions that you could add, because that sounds great. But I think going in to clearly articulate to council, if you want the code, you want it to change, here's the benefit, here is the cost, so that we're going in
Yes.
and maybe get what we want.
But I will say, yes, that's absolutely true. Also, though, as I said earlier, we do have a lot of developers who do it right, and this will help them, those sites. Somebody who's, doing it right, following the code, wanting to keep their landscaping alive. So this will have an immediate benefit from that perspective. But yeah, those that are like,
I think the code, what I'm hearing here is that it's also getting developed to make it more easily to understand. So you're looking at people who are maybe not developing multiple things at once, but maybe they're like small developers that are starting off and they just want to know how to do it right. And this is kind of helping those people have a clear, this is what I need to do. And I feel like that's what the code is doing. And city's goal is to reduce the island effect, right? And then to keep trees from dying. And the people who are, and then there was one more, the, runoff, to help with runoff. And so if that's the city's overarching goal, I think this is gonna help a lot of people, especially small developers who are just trying to understand what they need to do to get this developed, so. On the glass half full side. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a way to sort of share the burden here. It's like, will demonstrate my absolute lack of understanding about how the whole process works. But I mean, if someone is coming in and saying, this is the kind of, landscaping that we're going to do, rather than wait until whatever it is done and having to send a human being out to look at it and see if that's true. I mean, can't we just require them to provide us with all the documentation on the front end and, let the...
That's how Tulsa does it. You get the landscape plan approved at building permit, you build it, and then you have to take photos, and whoever prepared the landscape plan is supposed to be your inspector. So they take photos and say, 12 trees exist on the site, this was there, and you gotta turn around and give back to the city staff for
So, I mean, at least you're not having to, have an army of code enforcement people. Also, with parking lots, it's better than having to peek over people's backyard fences, right? I mean, they're there, you can see them. What's there or not there is pretty obvious, so.
The complaint system's good too, because if a development's not a good partner in their community, people are gonna be more likely to say, hey, they put all the trees in, they all died. I don't like this place.
And it puts the cost on the developer a little bit than on the city.
How many building permits per year does anybody know? Commercial building permits?
50 to 70, we've seen some years.
No,
with a
no,
little-
no, building permits.
Building
I think it's about 2,500 or something.
2,500, okay, so,
Building permits.
I was thinking just commercial only.
yeah, commercial, all right. Well, I mean, I think in 3 years, I mean, I think, you know, you have inspectors going out and inspecting the electrical. Why couldn't, in 3 years, an inspector go out and say, yeah, their landscape is thriving, or they need to replace it? And I think it could be done as well.
Yeah, well, there are lots of ways to do it, and we need to have that discussion. And to the point that was made earlier, you'll see in the code, it does contemplate, and we were debating this the other day, like, do we have a Tulsa-style thing, where we have, hey, we need a certification from a professional that says it was done right? That was in the code. I can't remember if that's where we landed on or not.
It's in there.
Okay.
We didn't know how people would take it, but I like the fact that y'all think.
There's language in there about having a certified arborist, and that's one of the things that we were like, okay, well, how many of those do we have? Is that something that we can require feasibly, or do we have to expand that open to a certified, various kinds of certification, people who are qualified? Sounds like maybe what Tulsa does. But yeah, showing images, having some certification that it was installed correctly would be a step in the right direction.
And this would be only for the trees. The landscape focus group was like, you don't need everyone to sit and watch them plant the sod, they thought the trees were the important part of the professional being there. And I think we talked to some of the companies that they have people that do that. I don't know if they always come on site, the people, the nurseries.
I mean, I would be, just me, but I'd be opposed to there being a certification type of requirement for that piece, because a lot of the installers and a lot of our plant experts in town are not landscape architects. We only have a handful of landscape architecture firms in this town. Like a lot of our heavy lift is by the grower and the installer and the contractor. So they know sometimes more than people who have a license or certification. So I think.
I was going to say certified maybe by the city, and that might include people who are board certified, but it might also include people who've been in this business for 20 years. I mean, it's like, when I want to call somebody, it's usually the guy that's been doing this for 20 years, that I call out to the house to do something.
That's also separate from the ongoing monitoring of whether or not
You're right about that.
sustainability of the tree,
We often don't even have landscape architects on a project, and we're relying on total environment as they are basically the de facto landscape architect. They're kind of recommending things and installing it, because clients can't afford all that extra design sometimes.
And then even with the photos, like in the Tulsa projects we've worked on, we do the landscape plan. We don't drive out to Tulsa. We rely on the contractor or the owner to walk the site, send us a video, take pictures, and show us, and then we say, we showed plantings here, 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 and here. Here are the photos of proof. And if the city questions, well, that tree doesn't look like a Chinese pistache, well, then they go out and they look at it if they've got a spot check question. It's an annoying letter to fill out, because it's kind of like, can I just send you the pictures in the form? But
Well, like the Urban Renewal Authority here in Oklahoma City has similar additional requirements for landscaping on any project that it is directly, working on a develop. Same with OCRA, Oklahoma City Redevelopment Authority. We'll put additional landscaping requirements on, and they have to show that they've developed their project consistent with all of the approved documents, including landscaping plans. But that's just checked off by folks that work for the Alliance. And they're like, oh, here's a tree and it was planted here and it was I don't know, tree, it was a Japanese maple, it had leaves and whatnot, and they're just checking that box. But that's directly tied to ours or Cura's certificates of completion. So it's a part of you built your building, and you dug the wires and you did all that and you built everything associated with the project, including the landscaping.
my main thing would be, I don't want it to get overly tedious at that inspection stage, because what happens is we'll spec trees, And Total Environment will come in and go, we don't have any of those right now. We've got these that are still qualified trees. To then go at the CO stage, go, you need to get back with your designer. We need a new landscape plan and change that from a Chinese pistache to an elm, whatever. That's just added cost for no benefit. The trees were planted. It was an approved tree. You do have to find that line of like, it's okay just to let it go at that point.
Yeah.
And not require plan changes and resubmittal to get back in a queue to get a CO.
There should be some flexibility when you have to substitute out the same size tree or something.
Right. The plans just say approved tree, approved medium-sized tree, yeah.
And that's where the total environment people, I think, are probably more beneficial to talk to than a landscape architect. They're the ones, a lot of landscape architects do plans and they're out of the project. They don't even stay in through install. So they don't know when things get changed. They show up to the site to take their marketing photos and go, well, I didn't pick that tree. Right? Like, and I love all of them, they're all great, but there is a bit of a disconnect in this particular market between the landscape architects and the contractors.
You also have the architects, they'll spec a tree, and then the landscape, like Pitzer, who we use, they'll say, this won't grow.
Yeah.
You need to replace that, so that happens a lot too. And you gotta remember, we have really clay soil here. You know, we have to line stabilize, because if we don't, the parking lot's just gonna, it's gonna expand and contract. And I don't know anything about landscaping, I don't, but I just, you gotta take that into consideration. I mean, does lime, I don't know, I'm asking, will that kill the dirt for landscaping? I don't know. But I think that's the kind of thing we gotta look at in Oklahoma City, because it is very clay soil.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This was so helpful. We will circulate a draft in a couple of weeks. We're going to look at some comparison examples, have a drink and draw, strategic, informative time. Yes.
One, so for at least in the urban movement, specifically Ward 2, rather than giving my opinion on what we should do, I'd like to just articulate a problem and then in a subsequent gathering hear what we're proposing is how would address this problem. The problem as I see it is so very specifically right now, as you very well know, we are installing sidewalks for the first time on Northwest Expressway. This is a great accomplishment. The advocacy I have been doing as a transit trustee and as a counselor has been to plant trees along the sidewalks. We as Embark have even done a study of the utility lines to figure out where it makes the most sense to do these trees. Working with OKC Beautiful, we have gone to the different property owners along where those sidewalks are going to ask them to maintain the trees in the public right-of-way that we would plant. Many of them said no. I think that is madness. I truly do. I'm in awe. I spoke with Natalie at OKC Beautiful, and as it turns out, and I think I spoke with someone in planning, I can't remember who it was. But as it turns out, this is a best practice somehow across the country, that municipalities rely on a private property owner to maintain a tree in the public right-of-way. That does not square in my head. I genuinely, and I'm not trying to be combative, I'm just saying public right-of-way, private property, why that would not be the purview of the municipality, stunning. And I would suggest that the consequences are as follows, right? I'm truly in awe and in love with seeing the sidewalks at like Meridian, et cetera, or the ones over I-44. But their usage, I'm guessing, as we put them in, I'm always happy when I do see people walking on them, but if it's 100 and death outside as it was earlier this week, if we're trying to reduce heat islands, I don't understand the logic. So I'd like to know how the new code is going to address, in my mind, what is a major problem, especially along a $28 million taxpayer investment in a BRT there. The second problem is when I look nearby off of the expressway at Best Buy and all of that, and you just have this giant parking lot that is this heat island. I'd like to know kind of two things there. Like, one, will this code, I started hearing rumblings of it today, would it allow us to be able to get, that developer, 23rd and Penn with the Penn crossing, to have to go back in and plant trees within either the parking lot or B, along arterials. And to me, these are like the needs that I hear all the time when I'm talking to Ward 2 residents, is walkability or accessibility generally. Within that accessibility, I'm not saying anything, of course, our planning friends don't know, and of course I'm guessing from our urbanist world, that the safety and comfort of that passage is there. And so we don't have, of course, I know I'm running every time. I'm saying that next time we meet, I would like to know, and it's kind of to Counselor's point, I'm still a bit hazy on the math and why those specific variables, like the 90% and the 100%. So talk to me like I'm 6 would be very useful. Very, very useful. You're not going to be condescending when you do that. So yeah, those are the problems as I see them as we are doing all this work, and we're just to selfishly be Ward 2 to improve the infrastructure. I'm trying to get those trees in there, and right now it's like banging my head up against a brick wall, and I find it very frustrating when we put trees in the beautification in Maps 4. I thought when I did that, working with Ryan McMullen, who was advocating for it, I thought that I'd solved the puzzle, and instead I feel like I'm back at square one. And then relatedly, these parking lots like the Salad and Go that they're able to do at 23rd and Penn, I'd like for that to never happen again. And I'd like to know how the code is going to, I don't like that once you're under 75 parking spaces, where you put your parking, it seemed like, didn't seem to matter in what we were doing here. And so I'd like to better understand how we can avoid parking that's in the front of buildings, at least in Ward 2. So those are kind of my major things, is I want to see how this is going to help avoid those past sprawling sins in the urban medium, and how we can maybe even retrofit some of those parking sins of a Best Buy, of a Salad and Go, to meet the needs. And then finally, to your point, there's two things. I would love, again, like a dum-dum, I would love to be able to see, and I think you said this too, but right now the code, this is what it would make us do. For development, here is what the update, I want a draw, I want to be able to see that. It would be so, as a visual learner, that would be so helpful.
You want to draw while drinking?
I don't touch the stuff. No, I ain't seen it before. No, I just think that would be a very useful thing to be able to drop down menu, be able to see those things. Damn it, I lost the second one. Those things would all be very helpful to be able to see what the code is going to. Yes, got it. And then it's the question. I think there's a very deliberate question. I do not know if everyone has the same question, but I pulled up an article from Reason magazine, which I keep reading lately as a progressive. I don't know what's happening. They're more conservative, I think libertarian arguably. But on parking minimums, we're on the same page. I'm looking at North Carolina, Denver, Dallas, getting rid of parking minimum requirements.
Even for residential?
It's gone. One city, I want to say it was Chicago, I just pulled up parking minimums. I didn't even put in yes or no. And I just clicked on news and just got all this. Some of them are eliminating them, to Janice's earlier comment, just around the transit stations and stuff. I would love for you all to come back to us and explain, like, to me, the question for Ward 2 is how do we reduce construction cost for our housing needs, and how do we build the affordable housing? These are the two questions. It is just an affordability question, and that's what I want to be able to go back to council with, to Kamal's point. I want to be able to go back and say, the question is, how do we build affordable housing in Ward 2? How do we reduce the construction cost? And why is it important, in my opinion, just from what I'm reading there, to remove the parking minimums, because it seems to be adding onto the construction cost, which they then pass on to the lower and middle class. So that's where I need help with, because right now it just seems like
second that takeaway. I really do think we should think more carefully about establishing a minimum for residential. I do.
About
Having it or not?
having or
Not
not
having
having?
Not having it.
We can take it out right now if you all
I mean,
want.
but I think we need to just have some more creative thinking about what we can do to, inevitably, we're gonna fight with some of my neighbors about when there's infill, they wanna be assured that they won't have,
same in mine. But I think that's why your earlier question was so important of like, what are we trying to achieve, and what do we need to be talking to council and these neighbors about what we're trying to achieve? I'm trying to achieve an affordable quality of life for my people.
We're willing to fight the fire marshal, because the zoning code, like, I think the fallacy right now, and this is a tangent, but the fallacy right now is that if we fix the zoning code, housing's gonna get more affordable. The rezoning process is not what's driving up costs. It's sprinkler requirements for fourplexes, it's double stairwell requirements in smaller apartment buildings, and other cities have worked to amend the IFC, but I don't know if you remember, but Jeff and I talked about this 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, and Canton just burned down. And Mike Wilson was like, I'm not gonna entertain loosening sprinkler requirements when we just had a 300 unit complex burned to the ground. It was hooked up wrong, there were other issues there, but like, the zoning code, well, it's a component of it, that's not where the construction costs are being driven from.
Well, I think in this drink and sip draw, I'm glad you said that, Mark, because I think what would also be very useful for me, and I think this is where especially our infill development-minded folk would be very useful. And I've heard fits and starts from different people through the years. I think it'd be very useful as a workshop. Like, show me an empty plot of land, show me how much it costs right now, and then show me foundation up. Like, this is not my field, right? My field is English and film studies. Show me from the ground up what it costs to build these things. And to sound like a conservative right now, then now show me what is getting in the way. But then as someone who's very ethic-minded, now show me what we have to do for safety, right? And just show me. And once you all can explain that to someone like me, I can turn and I can explain that to the residents of you. And right now, I think that is what's missing. Like, why is it costing what it's costing to do these infill things, whether it's the parking minimums or it is these sort of other more regulatory things. But there has to be a right balance between over-regulation and safety. So
We can host a ULI event that walks you through multiple properties and the exact cost, and we can have current construction numbers, and we can do all that. What we've seen is the issue of the political capital it takes for you to turn to your council when a fire marshal is standing in front of them saying, it is not safe, do not do this, and you saying, but it's better for affordable housing. And you've got architects and developers saying, 98% of your calls are not fire related. Modern houses have better materials, they don't burn down at the rate. But when the fire marshal still stands there and says, when that person dies, it is on the 9 of you. We're going through that in Norman right now. Like, you guys have to be willing to stand up and say, we understand fire marshal, but you just did it, we're gonna follow it.
Well, do your homework and bring it to us. But I think it does get it's sort of two different aims, you know. The zoning code can do a lot to affect creating a process that allows for greater density and the kind of development that we know contributes to making it easier for you to build more affordable housing or more units in general. Like creating a process that allows for that to happen, creating a process that allows for us to build green spaces and trees and eliminate some of these other issues. But but to your greater point about housing and housing costs, yeah, it's a bigger conversation than just the zoning code that we should be talking to. What is it? Some housing stability group has been formed. I know there's different groups handling this.
I think that's part of the problem locally is Housing Forward out of Tulsa is technically statewide, but they're not doing anything here. We do not have an advocacy group locally focused on infill or different housing options. ULI cannot advocate. You can have whatever events you want and we can educate people, but there's no group here that's banding together to say, fire marshal or city zoning code, this is what we need to happen. That doesn't exist. Somebody would have to start that advocacy arm, or you guys have to convince Housing Forward to open up an office in Oklahoma City and actually be statewide. But they're funded by Tulsa people, so.
You guys passed the ADU code, thankfully, recently.
Yes,
so
thank you.
Yeah,
that's a step in
an arm and a leg, so, yeah.
Elimination of parking minimums, you know, I mean, that's a quite amazing step forward. I think whether the ratio should be less than 1 on residential is definitely worth shooting.
We will explore that, and, you know, because if the council wants to say that, hey, for purposes of affordability, we're trying to reduce costs and adding that much concrete, reduce, or taking requirement away, reduces cost, we can do that. What we were trying to do is come up with some, given the accessory dwelling, trying to come up with something that is as politically feasible as possible and trying to pick our battles. So, but maybe that's not a battle that people will be all that worried about, frankly. But we were concerned that we would get opposition from residents about, hey, we don't want you taking away our parking minimums. I mean, we're certainly open to it. That was our preference.
Janice represents a pretty large swath of Oklahoma City residents' typical concerns that I have.
And what we're proposing is 1/3 to 1/2 of what residential is required now. So it's not like.
So it's a
going down.
reduction.
At the end of the day, can you get these 6 other council people to support what the folks representing the urban media want in light of what will likely be a lot of protest? I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what's in the code, like that's the question. Can you get people who don't represent this part of the city to, in the face of protest, go, the 3 that represent it want it, and I'm good with it?
Well, and what we could do is, I mean, we have the LUDA modifier, so we could make it higher for the suburbs if that's what they want, you know?
Because the ADUs, you still had, those were all Ward 2, pretty much, residents protesting, and you still had council people not sure they can get in line partially because there were people standing in front of them saying they don't want it. That's the...
But
there's not a parking minimum on the LUDA piece, that you're just talking about the threshold piece, right?
Well, I'm just saying that we could do that for the LUDA if
That's what my takeaway from today is we need to study that.
if that would help them get behind it, we can do that if we need to.
The modifier.
And the minimum could change, the residential minimum could change based on LUDA, depending on what.
have to go, don't be jealous, have to drive to Lawton. Calm down, everybody. But thank you, and I look forward to learning a bit more, appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.